Hey folks, welcome back to the Product Pivot. I am Santi with my amazing co-host Megan, and we are super excited to be kicking this episode off with Steve to do a little recap of what this podcast is all about. We share real stories from folks in the product space that have a ton of insights, whether it's journeying into product management, things they've learned in product management, or other adjacent roles. So we're super excited to have Steve back on this show with us, and I'm going to flip it over to him so he can give a reintroduction about himself.
Great. Well, I'm certainly glad to be here again. My career is kind of weird. I feel like I've done pretty much all the jobs in a software company. But my first job out of college, I was a developer, and then I became a sales engineer, and then I became a sales rep, then I became a product manager, and then moved up through the ranks. And then I joined Pragmatic Marketing as the first instructor. Then about 15 years ago, I started Product Growth Leaders. And we help teams implement the best practices of product management, or at least the best practices as I define them.
That's getting its own clip.
That's getting its own clip.
You want product best practices? Here's Steve as he defines them.
That's so funny. No, I love that. Steve, I love your background, and obviously we love you. So we're super excited that you're here with us again. I know last time, one of the things we really wanted to get through and talk about was your QUARTZ framework. So
Right.
we're really excited to hear about that today. We've obviously both had the opportunity to experience a little bit of product growth leaders and learn more about what you do outside of our own time. But we want to share a little bit about that with the audience here today.
Well, when I started Product Growth Leaders, the thing I kept stumbling across was nobody seemed to have a very clear perspective on the scope of product management. And it's just gotten worse. I think the Agile Manifesto was a wonderful document. But over time, and we certainly see this now, product managers have moved out of the business role of product management into the technical role. And now we see with AI and vibe coding, we're in the development role now. So a bunch of us got together and started brainstorming how to convey to not only the product managers, but to their leadership, the scope of product management. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. The core of product management is learning. And I'm watching all of these people say, well, I don't need to learn. I'll just ask AI. And, that's not the right answer, right? So a bunch of us, again, tried to define the scope of product management in an accessible way. A lot of the things that you see are either too simplistic or so complicated as to make your head spin. I saw a process diagram that I thought looked remarkably like the Japanese subway system. And, way too complicated. But anyway, in the blue, we have defining what problem we're trying to solve for what customer base, and then committing the resources to address it. Not like, oh, in your spare time, could you create this whole new product, right? You need to commit the resources of people and time and sometimes training and money. And then we get into describing the problem to the people who are going to create things. And in some cases, that's, development, of course. But in some cases, it's, hardware engineers. In some cases, it's marketing people who are needing to build, campaigns or content, or services people who are going to create an implementation or installation sort of service. So the creation is not necessarily software, in other words. And this is the part that kind of drives me crazy. Right now, it seems like I'll put that back. Right now, it seems like product managers are spending the vast majority of their time shepherding the create process. They're more project managers. They're sometimes assigning tasks to various developers, which means they're the engineering manager. So, what the heck, right? And then they say, okay, our job is done. The product is finished. We've released it. And you're like, yeah, but you haven't launched it. because then come the green facets. It's like we have to prepare our teams to support this thing. And then we deliver it to our customers and start monitoring their success. And then it begins all again. And as I said at the beginning, in each of those phases, we learn stuff. And sometimes we learn stuff that says, oh, shoot, we need to go back a step. And it also is rather subtle, but these facets overlap with one another. As you're often doing multiples of these at the same time. In particular, while we are creating the product, we almost instantly begin preparing the go-to-market teams for this new thing, whatever it is. It could be a new release, it could be a new product, it could be a new option, a new service. And I've been using this tool really to express to product managers that their job is so much bigger than reading aloud to developers from JIRA, and to leadership that it's so much bigger than writing a PRD. And while I'm ranting, because I didn't know people even wrote PRDs anymore, but I recently chatted with a product manager. She shared her PRD with me, and it was not a PRD. It was a design spec. A product requirements document has always meant, here is a business document about problems we want to solve for a market and persona. And yet over the years, and I'm not quite sure where this comes from, but I think some of it certainly comes from engineers who have moved into product management roles. They've turned into spec docs. And this PRD she was sharing with me had things like, what hex code the buttons will be, and how much curve there is in the corners. And that's important stuff, but it's not product management. And one more rant while I'm here. Oh, here, I'll give you my little rant button. Here we go.
I live for these.
I was on a thing in Reddit, and somebody asked, what's your favorite prototyping tool? Somebody said, oh, I'm using Base 44. And somebody said, I'm using Balsamic. And somebody else said, oh, I still like, pen and paper. And I popped in and said, my preferred UX design, my preferred design prototyping tool. There we go. My preferred prototyping tool is a qualified designer. And then, everybody blew up and I got downvoted all over the place. But what I see is we're not doing product management. We're doing design and development. And so that's my jihad. I'm spending my life trying to get people back to this business role of product management, which it seems we're uniquely qualified to do, as opposed to, like, sales guy comes in and says, I might be able to close a deal if you add this feature. Well, that's not focused on the market. That's focused on the deal of the day. And it's that kind of thinking that leads to these bloated products that Pendo says 60% of functions have never been used in the typical enterprise B2B product. It's like not rarely, it's not never, right? And a similar example, I forget what the stat is. I think it's 25% of the apps in the iPhone store have never once been downloaded. And you think,
Insane.
mom would download it. Or at least you get
Ouch.
to download it, make sure it does in fact download. It's just so odd to me. But anyway, that's the point really of QUARTZ, is to say, let's look at the bigger view of how we embrace learning in each of the phases of ideation to creation to go to market.
I want to embrace your rant a little bit. And I want to ask, if you were talking to, let's have both scenarios, but let's first talk to the founder today that
Mhm.
has their product manager doing prototyping, and even maybe let's say like shipping to production. Let's just like live both scenarios. And their PM is doing both. How do you bring them back to business case, product management? And
Right.
like, what would you say to them to get them convinced that they're doing something wrong?
Well, for a start, most founders are the product manager.
Hey everyone, it's Sandy popping in real quick to talk about Prodfolio. As we know, storytelling is a massive part of product management, but sometimes we struggle to tell our own. Meg and I are no exception, and after having many conversations with other product people, we noticed a trend. Lots of other PMs struggle to tell their story too. So, like this podcast, Meg and I set off to help close this gap we were seeing, which is where Prodfolio comes in. Prodfolio is a portfolio building tool that helps product managers tell their story in a way that hiring managers are actually interested in seeing, all in a fraction of the time as other methods. Show your work, own your impact. Link in the description.
I see two scenarios really with founders. One is they created something for themselves for their day job and got some interest from friends and colleagues. And they went, maybe there's a business here. And they went to their partner and said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And the partner said, okay, you've got 6 months and then you have to go get a real job, uh, and, and, and those founders, the ones we know about, were right. They were really engaged with their market because they were the market.
Mhm.
Um, where it gets tricky is on the second and third product. So that sort of a schema, the founder creates this really successful product, and then guess what? They get kind of disconnected from the customer base. And so then they're like, hey, God spoke to me in a dream. I've got this idea for a great new product, and I did so well with that first product. I'm sure this is going to go well. And the second product does okay, but not great. And then, sometime later they go, well, I've got another idea for a product. And that turns out to be an absolute disaster because as time goes by, the founder is no longer the market. They've changed from doing the work to running a business, which is what they're supposed to do, right? But now they're dealing with hiring and firing and financing and courting developers and courting investors. It's not the same work anymore. And usually, I think it's like the third product that they go, something is wrong, and uh, I hope they turn to a product manager. I think more realistically, in today's startup, they hire a product manager to do the secretarial work. It's like, I have the idea. Could you bring up JIRA and do your little typey thing and take my ideas and turn them into tickets? And what's so frightening to me about that is absolutely going away with AI.
Yeah, that's true.
What isn't going away is the problem I talked about with the founder, that as they grow their business, they get further disconnected from their customers. And my recent book is Customer Conversations, which I have determined is the product manager's superpower that cannot be replaced by AI.
And I don't think it should. I really don't. I
And
think it can be helpful, but
in the
not.
book, and maybe you've had this experience as well. Every time I have visited with a customer on Zoom or in real life or even on the phone, I hear something that they didn't say.
100%. That is the most realistic statement I've ever heard. They always are more willing to say it to your face once you've built trust than they would
Right.
through any chain, Slack, email, text, whatever the heck you want to say.
Right. And, you've also probably heard me say, when customers request a feature, they're almost always wrong. when customers tell you about a problem, they're almost always right. And AI is not going to help us there. And, back to your trust point, I do another little rant. I don't know how much I trust AI or the companies behind AI to keep my private information private. I mean, I could certainly be more comfortable talking to one of you, knowing that you're not instantly going to share it with uh, whoever, right? A couple of years ago, I think they passed yet another law that said your browser history is now public domain. Uh, and I don't know if it passed, but I do remember somebody saying, as soon as that passes, I'm going to get all the browse history of all the Congress people and post them online. But, I don't want my conversations to be data mined, or certainly my browser history.
Absolutely not. I think about that every time I ask Claude a question.
Mhm.
Even if it's just like a work question, I still think about like, what if someone accessed this question and was like, "Oh, she doesn't know how to do that. Oh, she
Right.
is unaware of how to do that without asking Claude or whatever." You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I think about it every time I am in one of those systems, and it's why I stopped using OpenAI. I don't use any OpenAI products
Mhm.
at all, just because I don't trust them, just based upon how everything went with like the government and everything.
Yeah.
I don't use any of their products
I'm
anymore.
trying really hard to ignore what you just said, though. I've got a relationship going with ChatGPT. It knows me. It knows what I've written. I've given it lots of information about me. Uh,
Yeah.
have unchecked the thing of, training the LLM on my info, but I don't know if that actually does anything or if it's a placebo.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it's just like I'm not ready to set up another relationship.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I mean, when ChatGPT started, it was everyone still says ChatGPT, right? When they're referring to any LLM, they still say GPT or ChatGPT because it was the first one. We talked about that on Aaron's episode of the podcast.
Yep.
So it was the original one. I think we all started there, and I started there. And when I moved over to Claude, it was only because I was having more success with its outputs, and I was sick of ChatGPT saying, "Great job, you're awesome." I got so sick of it because I don't like that
I've
type
got
of conversation.
It's, I don't get enough positive feedback, and it's kind of nice that
S
it goes
Steve needs it.
how bright I am.
So, that's the only reason I moved. I mean, I know, Santa, you use Claude primarily now too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
similar reasons. I just liked that Claude was a little more, like, cool about it, you know? It was just like I asked the question and it was like, "Yeah, okay, cool, let's dig into that a little." It was just more conversational, it seemed to be more, like, blunt, which I liked. Seemed to have a little more of its, like, act together in terms of responses, seemed to be a little more knowledgeable and didn't just pull things out of thin air as much. That's just my personal experience. I still think, ChatGPT has pros to it, like, image generation and stuff like that, it's definitely superior, but I use Claude more.
I've heard their codex is, gotten a lot better as well, like, codex is pretty good.
Oh, awesome.
So, I've used that model within Cursor in the past, like, I would say 6 months, but I haven't used it in the past, like, 3 or 4 months,
Mm.
but I've heard it's gotten pretty awesome.
Yeah. But getting back to the whole learning thing, it it worries me when I talk to product managers who don't even realize that customer engagement is core to their job. It's like, I'll get to that when I'm done prototyping. you know, I'll get to those conversations later, and you never find time. I mean, you have to make time. You have to make time for it. But I was in a training recently, and I said, when was the last time? I forget how I put it. How many of you have talked to a customer this year? And only a few people raised their hands.
This year.
Oh
And
my god.
one of them said, "I've been in this company for 3 years, and I've never met a customer." And
That's like rule number one.
yeah, if you've been trained in product management. I mean, if not, it's like, well, where's all the noise coming from? Developers asking me to come in to approve a design, or they're asking me to tell them what to build. And, if you're using outsourced developers, you're more likely to be doing build what I tell you instead of solve this problem. Um, I am enthused at the number of articles I've read about companies realizing they need more product managers because now AI has made their developers more productive.
It's true.
And so now, I mean, one of the big challenges always has been is that development moves faster than product management. And so they're like, "Hey, what do you want us to work on?" And you go, "Oh, I've been really busy reading aloud from SharePoint to the salespeople, and I haven't gotten around to it." And they're like, "Oh, okay, well, we'll just build some shit then, see what happens."
Yeah.
Um, but if AI does in fact improve the productivity of your senior developers, then we need ever more to be able to feed them the problems that we're encountering in the market. But you have to be encountering them in the market as opposed to saying, I have this idea, because ideas are cheap. And one of the things I call out in my book is first we need to do persona definition. Who is our customer? Which is amazing to me, the number of plus times I talk to people and they say, well, the user wants this. And I'm like, that phrase just drives me insane because it's not specific. And no other industry refers to their customers that way except for drug dealers. So I refuse to refer to users. I even struggle when I'm writing sentences. I'm like, I want to say the buyer and user of the system. And I always flip it around to those who buy and those who use our systems. Because I want to stay away from that word. But still, it's like, how can you represent the user if you've never met one?
It's true.
Right. So I derailed myself, but first we have to figure out who are we trying to delight? Who is the buyer and who is the user of this thing? And in consumer products, they're often the same, but in business products, they're usually different.
Yep.
And once you've done that, you need to understand the friction in their life. And my best friend Barb Nelson, she and I were on the phone yesterday, and we were using the email editor, the newsletter editor in our website, which they have improved, and now we can't use it anymore. Uh, eh, there's all of this. I don't even know why why they changed it, but uh, we encountered so many problems, and at least 3 times in the conversation, she said, "I wish the product manager could join this Zoom session and just watch how frustrated we are in doing
Yeah.
this thing." Right? I've been using computers since high school, so I've been around for a while, and it shouldn't be bewildering to me, but it was.
Yeah.
So anyway, personas, and then you have to understand the problem, and then you work with your dev team and your designers to come up with potential solutions to the problem. And then guess what? There's one more. You then go back to the customer and say, tell me again about your problem. And do you think this feature will solve that problem? And so there's 3 types of customer conversations there. It's like, who are you? What problem do you have? And does this thing solve it? And at best, at best, product managers and dev teams are saying, hey, we've built this thing. Do you like it?
It's really interesting because when I asked the question, we were kind of talking about the founder, right? And like,
Mhm,
what would you tell the founder? What if we flipped it and we have the product manager who's been forced to prototype and
mhm.
forced to push code? W- What do they do? Like they don't have time to talk to customers. And how do they change this workflow that they've been forced into if they don't really have the
Mm.
I don't know, the pull to talk to founders. Like I've seen a lot of posts recently from very egotistical founders calling out product managers, saying that there are very few product managers out there actually doing product management work because a lot of PMs out there are just pushing tickets or just doing this or just doing that and not actually doing real product management work. What they don't realize, a lot of founders don't freaking let them.
Is the truth of it is I'd say most product managers are not doing product management, right? They're doing what you said. They're doing design. They're pushing tickets. They're dabbling in code, which is really disturbing to me. Uh, I really kind of like everybody doing the job they were hired for instead of the other nonsense. But anyway, um, the second issue, though, is the founder or CTO or CEO who says, my product managers aren't doing what I think product management is, which is development. So in the second scenario, you're kind of screwed, right? If your boss and his boss and her boss uh, think that product management should be releasing code to the market, then they don't know what product management is. And it just means that they've got the wrong title. It sounds like many people who are writing today are saying, I want product managers to be engineering managers. And that's fine. Let's change the title. But let's get product management back to defining the persona, defining the problems, validating the solutions.
So would you say there's still a huge educational gap in what product is? Yeah, yeah, sounds like it. That's what we suspected. Meg and I have
Yeah,
talked about this.
it's twofold. It's the leadership often doesn't know. And more frightening to me is usually often the product manager doesn't know. And I saw a thing on Reddit a while back. The guy said, I've accepted a job as a product manager. I've had no onboarding. I've had no training. I'm terrified I'm going to be fired because I don't know what I'm doing. And, my first reaction was, how in the world did this kid get a job as a product manager? And secondly, what kind of manager is onboarding you by saying, go do the thing you do, whatever that is? I mean, you'd think he, recognize you've got a new unskilled employee here who needs some direction.
Yeah.
I
One
think it
thing
happens a lot.
I think it does too, because one thing I was told very early in my product career is if you ask 5 different people what product management is, you're gonna get 5 different answers.
Hmm.
And I think that is still true, and there is variation, but I guess my question to you, Steve, is like, I think any company, any industry, any role is gonna have at least some variation, but like,
Hmm.
to a certain extent, but what's I get not the acceptable amount of variation, but like how would you describe kind of product management then to someone that's brand new to it and is in that situation of maybe they just got their first product role, maybe it's a junior product role and they don't know any better, like knowing that there can be a little variation, but what does that look like for them?
Well, gosh, that's a nice callback to how we started this call. That's why I created the QUARTZ Open Framework. It's like you think it's only this little piece, but wait, there's so much more. And when we talk about it, and you and I, the three of us have talked about it, it's like when you realize it's about removing friction for everybody involved in product. Making it easier to buy, easier to implement, easier to use, but also easier to sell and easier to market. And when you start thinking about it in terms of friction, then it's like, oh, yeah, I need to be involved in all 7 of those aspects of Quartz, particularly the learning parts.
Right, right.
I wonder, this is just like me thinking out loud. I wonder if you were to compare a company not using product managers to like their maximum potential and instead like using a product manager for what other the things that we've been listing, right? Versus a product manager using a product man or a team using a product manager for what they're supposed to be used for, what the revenue differences might look like. And I know there's like a million other factors that could be placed there. But with somebody actually working the way they're supposed to work in a product manager role, revenue is obviously something that they're keeping an eye on and they're
Mhm.
focused on, and the business itself and growing the business. But if you've got someone that's writing tickets, prototyping, and too focused on writing dev tickets and working with dev and pushing code to production, someone's ignoring all of those other things that help
Mhm.
grow revenue.
Mhm.
And you're losing a really critical piece to help grow your business. So I almost wonder, like, I feel like founders are hurting themselves and shooting themselves in the foot by not optimizing the PM role.
Well, I agree, and it's interesting that I've worked with a few PE firms, and they almost always say, "Step one, hire a product manager,"
Yeah.
and that's new. I don't. I mean, I think 20 years ago it was first do you have a CTO, second do you have a VP of sales, third do you have some sales reps, and somewhere along the way maybe we'll hire a product manager. It was like a nice to have, but I guess I see I guess I see 2 kinds of companies, those who have experienced good product management and those who haven't. And, those startups, as I said, the founder's the product manager, but when they bring in outside funding and the PE firm says, "Okay, let's talk about a product manager," it I think it's the first time they've heard what a product manager should be doing, which is basically backfilling all the things that the founder did the first time that the founder doesn't have time to do anymore, right? Um, and it has been my experience that, well, 2 things. Uh, w- One interesting thing to do is to say, who's your expert on the market? And the CEO often will say, well, me. And I'm like, okay, well, is that scalable? How are you sleeping at night? And I had an experience a few years ago that the founder was the domain expert. And every morning when she came to work, there was a line of people waiting to talk to her about should we do it this way or that way? Because she was the only one who understood the domain well. And so I challenged her to start doing a bunch of Friday lunch and learns to get people to understand it. And I found I've done that throughout my career, that I start working with certainly the customer facing teams on let's talk about this space and the friction in this space. And it's been amazing the number of times that I encounter salespeople who have never had training in the product or the domain. They've had training in methodology,
Mm.
right?
It's smart.
Um, so, from a founder standpoint, the PE firm says, you've got other things to do now. You need to have, like, I hate the term, you need to have a mini CEO who's looking at the business at the product level, particularly when you have multiple products.
Right.
The other thing we see when companies don't have a product manager is they listen almost exclusively to salespeople. And
Eek.
I love salespeople. I used to be in sales. I supported sales. I was very sales friendly as a product manager. But I recognize that they and the executives have an incredible capacity for amnesia. It's like, this is my top priority. Well, wait a minute. Last week, that was your top priority. So which of these number one priorities is the most number oneiest, right? And they're like, oh, can't you do
It's
both?
true.
And I'm like, well, great. Can't you just, sell 2 clients instead of 1? And they're like, oh, that's different.
I also think there's a missing piece there with like customer facing teams like CS or like sales,
Mhm,
where if something's important to a client, they wouldn't necessarily weigh how important that could be for other teams and how it might generate revenue down the road.
mhm,
There's not a lot of like weighing done there, especially against other things that might be waiting.
Right.
And so like there's just like a missing piece there that you can't just rely solely on that because they just want to close that sale or they want to keep that team around because it not because it looks good on them, but ultimately that's their job. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was doing a roles and responsibilities thing once, and every time I said something that had the word customer in it, one of the people in the room said, "Oh, yeah, that's sales responsibility." And I said, "No." And finally, I lost my temper, is what happened. But I finally said, "Sales has a job. Their job is to sell as much of what we have as they can, and we prefer that they sell what we have instead of selling what we don't have." Um, but it's not their job to define the markets we're going to serve. And just for a fun one, I worked for a VP for a CEO, and we were doing some like strategy stuff. And I came in with a bunch of win loss analysis, and I said, look at this. 90% of our sales have come from financial services organizations. And they're the shortest sales cycle, and they have very good referenceability, and there was all sorts of goodness to it. And he said, "Well, what about other markets?" And I said, "Well, we've had a few deals here and a few deals here, and these have not gone well. They have additional requirements that we can't meet, or they don't have the money, or whatever." But I had some diagnostics about the other markets too. And the president said, "Well, you know what? I've heard you're supposed to focus. So let's do that. Let's focus on financial services." And he announced it on a Friday meeting. And my worst salesperson said, "Well, wait a minute. I'm talking to, a retail chain." And the CEO said, "Well, is that a financial services organization?" And the salesman said, I don't think so." And he said, "Okay, well, keep going with that. But let me just say that we will not be paying commissions on any deals outside of financial services."
Eek.
And suddenly, all those weird deals went away. At the end of the day, though, I think that I do find that with, I absolutely believe in the team. I believe that development has an important role, and marketing has an important role, and sales has an important role, and product, and anybody else I've left out, support, service. I mean, they're all important. And when one of them has a disproportionate amount of political power, bad things happen, right? When the CTO is the strongest person on the team, then before you know it, it's like, well, we're spending an awful lot of energy on architecture and technical elegance, but we're not meeting the buying requirements. And when the VP of sales is the strongest political power, he wants 100% of development spend on custom work for uh, prospects. And meandering into this, what I see a lot of is feature bloat from sales driven organizations. And in the
Yeah.
technical organizations I've worked with, they seem really desperate and anxious for market insights, because it's a weird idea, but for somebody who creates stuff, it becomes like their child, and they care about it. I it's a weird concept, I guess, in my head, but I, I I see these technical teams saying, I want to understand how my product has made other people's lives better by reducing frustration or increasing the satisfaction in their work, or something more than just they paid us for it. And if you spend any time on like technical places, and right now my technical place is Reddit, but um, anyway, you see people say, "Hey, I had this idea and I built this app and I'd love you to try it out. They're anxious not for, they're not even trying to sell it. They're saying, I did this cool thing. Like I have an ebook reader, and this person has created a way of you reskinning the UI of the ebook. And people are like, man, this is great. How can I pay you? And he's like, oh, I don't want any money. And at some point he should set up some sort of a ability to say thank you. One, I use um, an ebook manager called Caliber, and every time he changes the first number, I send him money. And he comes out with a new release like every week. And he's doing this on the side. He's got a real job in real life. So anyway. I think that what I have found is that technical people, creators, builders, really want satisfied customers, and they want to know how they can satisfy customers. And frequently, they get a request like, we need to add AI. And it's like, why? Tell me why. And, it's like, okay, let me do it as a user story. As a user, I want AI so I can say I have AI. Right?
I see a lot of horror stories about that,
Yeah.
especially on Reddit. If Reddit is a place that you're hanging out, you're probably seeing it too. But I see especially a lot from product managers or just like women in tech. I see a lot from women in tech that are talking about that. It's it's like you kind of like lost the thread of like why we're building products, like
Right.
why we're building for the end user. It's like you're just trying to say like check mark, I have AI.
Right. Well, and you're probably not old enough to remember this, but when the internet happened, we did the same thing. We started building web pages with no idea why. And so what we did is like, oh, you have to have a web page. Okay, great. Well, they went to marketing and said, what do you have? And marketing said, well, we've got these brochures. And they're like, all right, let's put brochures on the website. And yeah, and we go through this with every big new technology. I mean, they tried to do it with blockchain, but it was so confusing. Nobody understood anything that anybody was saying. So it's like it never really happened, but you can see a website. You can't really see a blockchain. And the people behind blockchain were such technical, so deep technically, they couldn't talk human language.
I guess I'm curious. Like I was talking to a friend the other day. There's been some like posts out and everything like that about the rise of the cost of tokens
Hmm.
for different models and how they're going to potentially go up, right?
Sure.
And it
They have,
makes sense that we've all kind of like gotten used to using these tools. Like they've locked us in at this
right,
point. And so if they go up in a year, like what are we all gonna do? Especially these companies that have laid off hundreds of thousands of people, all these companies and replace them with AI, if that's even what they're doing, or if it's just a ploy, I don't really know. But like, what are we gonna do? Is this like that's gonna be the bubble burst thing? Like what is the thing that's gonna happen? Do you have theories?
well, I do. They're basically doing the freemium model, which is very much like the drug dealer model. It's like, try a little bit of this heroin. I think you'll like it. It's free. Well, it doesn't say free for very long, right? Once you're addicted to it, and I went too far with my story, but once you're addicted to it, it's like, well, yeah, I'll have to pay more. And so I'm, somewhat addicted to ChatGPT, and I feel like, I'm doing my right thing of contributing to their success at $20 a month. But apparently, I'm I'm costing them $2,000 a month, and at some point, those two things are going to have to balance. And so we may all find ourselves going, oh, shoot, we laid off all these people And now my token cost is more than the employee cost. And going back like 30 years, I remember talking to a product manager who said they had this product, they want to charge $100,000 for the product on a like a an annual license back in the day. And and I said, well, what is the benefit? And they said, well, it replaces clerical workers. And I went a little bit further. It turns out most companies had only one or two of those clerical workers, and those clerical workers were making $35,000 to $45,000 a year. So, what's the benefit? I, I'm going to pay $100,000 for these clerical workers, or I'm going to pay $100,000 for your software, and still need a clerical worker. So, actually, there's no ROI here. And if we're able to use AI at $1,000 or $5,000 a month and get the quality of code we would get from a $60,000 programmer, then maybe that's the future. But as somebody who has tried to work with outsourced firms, it's never quite as elegant as it sounded in the brochure. What's going to bust the bubble, honestly, is when they start billing us for usage. And then,
Yeah, I think so.
holy moly, I can't afford to use my preferred AI tool anymore.
And also consider the downstream effects of all of us who have built AI in our products. And now all the token costs are going to be costing those companies more. So they're going to need to raise their prices.
Right,
And
right,
then people aren't going to want to pay.
I've
right.
already seen this start to happen with a friend of mine who works for a company, and everybody and their dog is using Cursor in there. And the engineering team leader, one of the leaders came in and was like, "So we got the bill this month, and I'm gonna need y'all to stop using whatever model it was they were using because it was just so expensive, so expensive."
Well, I was also considering, so think about that, right? So if say you're at one of these companies, like let's just use Meta as an example, okay? Let's say you're at Meta and you get 1,400 people are replaced with or Claude or whatever, right? And then these tokens go up. There is no motivation for the remaining employees to keep costs down. You just laid off a
True.
ton of their friends.
True.
Where's the motivation for you to monitor your usage? You're just there until they lay you off too. At least that's what it would feel like for me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be monitoring my usage. I would just get scolded. It's just one of those situations where you're kind of just waiting for it to happen to you, which kind of sucks. But
Mhm.
also they aren't really setting up an environment where you feel motivated to keep the company's budget down. I don't know.
Well, there are
So
times when I feel like, the the CEOs think the ideal company size is 0.
yeah.
Um, there was a company many years ago, uh, laid off the entire product management department, and then 3 months later, called them all and said, we just figured out what you guys do. Would you come back?" And of course, nobody wanted to go back to a company that had laid them off because we don't know what the hell you
Yeah.
do. And again, this is really what I'm trying to convey nowadays is make sure your leadership knows the value that you bring that cannot be brought by AI. And but I think you're also right that 18 months down the road, we're going to see the real cost of AI, and suddenly it's going to be less attractive as an ROI model. And what I
Yeah.
was coming up, I mean, my first job out of college, I was a programmer at a company in Texas. In those days, computers were expensive and cheap. People were cheap. And now the reverse is true. But hang on, now that we've got AI involved, it turns out AI data centers are really quite expensive.
Yeah.
Yep, they are. So I guess I'm curious, like, do you think from what you're seeing in the job market when that bubble bursts, like, do you see it's and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're saying like you'll see kind of a swing back the other way. We're seeing the swing towards AI and all that fun stuff, but you're anticipating that swing is going to come back around. We're going to actually want more humans in these roles doing these things.
Right. I
Yeah.
believe that to be true.
I think so too. I agree.
And,
Yeah.
I see it a lot, through my career is, we all gravitate over here to whatever shiny object came along. And then, uh, if you remember Gartner, we're at the height of it, whatever expectations. And then we move to the trough of disillusionment. And at that point, you're like, oh, shoot, we made a big investment on pets.com and it's not working out. We're going to have to rethink and pivot. And in the case of the company I mentioned a moment ago, they're like figured it out and went, oh, shoot, developers are now prioritizing their work based on feedback from salespeople. And so they're prioritizing all the buying criteria and they're not prioritizing, say, technical debt or uh, using criteria, if you will. And so we really need to get those product managers back. And of course, the product managers by then had moved on to another role. So they had to hire a whole new set of product managers and train them in their products and their domains. And it's non-trivial bringing on a new, at least a senior person, because a lot of institutional knowledge has been walking out the door over the last couple of years.
Yeah. There's a real cost to that.
Yeah.
There is.
Well, let's talk about something positive.
Well, like, we spent a little too much time on AI. I know that I'm using it every day. I'm doing some vibe coding right now on a thing that I can't really explain in terms of a PRD to an outsourced firm. So I'm enjoying it, but it turns out uh, the AI and I suck at UI.
I was gonna ask you about this because I know that we were talking about PMs prototyping, and how it's, in some cases not a good thing because they're not doing the PM role. But can you share like maybe an anecdote of why maybe prototyping as a PM is good? Like, is there a use case that it actually is beneficial or it could be helpful or
Sure.
something like that?
So let me get there in a kind of roundabout way. The most powerful concept in lean startup is MVP, which everyone who read the book misunderstood because he meant to say prototype when he said product. That is to say, Eric Ries says this is the most misunderstood concept, but MVP is the smallest amount of work to prove or disprove a theory, which means a web page can be an MVP. A web page with a button to go to a mailing list is an MVP, right? Uh, what's what I see happening is product managers, usually inexperienced ones, trying to develop a basic product. And we've learned a lot about development over the last 50 years, right? As we perfect our DevOps and we make sure that our products are compliant and we ensure that your information is kept confidential. And I'm not completely sure my AI is understanding that as we go through here. And so I find myself going, well, I do a lot of exporting the code and then giving it to another AI and saying, hey, is this safe? But mostly it's like I'm learning to ride a bike here and I'm falling down a lot. And maybe I'll get better at it. But the point of prototyping is to prove a point, is to prove or disprove something you believe. And so that's a great use for vibe coding. It's like assuming you're any good at it, let's put together the most basic of things for what purpose? And the purpose is to validate the solution.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a good
and I
one.
think almost nobody is doing that. I think what
Really?
they're doing is programming.
Gotcha. See, because Meg, earlier when you were like, what would you say to product managers that are kind of forced to vibe code in those situations? In my brain, what immediately came to mind was, well, if it were me in that situation, let's say I'm at one of these companies that was like, you must vibe code. I would use it exactly as we just discussed. I would be like, okay, I'll vibe code, and I'll vibe code a prototype that I can bring to the customer.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right?
I mean, I did that. It was a big aspect of one of the last contracts that I had. I was using Lovable a lot. And I
Mhm.
think it's because the COO was really comfortable with prototyping as well. And so he was able to, like, I would send him a prototype and then he would modify it and then we could take it to customers.
Cool.
And so it was a really fun way for us to communicate together. And then it was also an easy way for us to bring to product meetings to show the CTO and the CEO, and we could like iterate on it together. The designer, I don't know how much he really liked it, but him and I are really close. So he just kind of went with it because it allowed the rest of the team to get their thoughts out. And then he also didn't have to interpret as much of everyone's
Right.
opinions that way. But I feel like that was nice. And it's been the first time I've done that. Outside of that, I have been like trying to interpret that more, but I feel like still customers aren't quite there. They're
Mhm.
not like
It's fair.
ready to be prototyped to as much in is from what I've experienced. I feel like they're more still in the talking phase. They want to get their thoughts out. But there have been a couple of times where they've been open to like receiving a prototype from me, where they've been excited to have visual aspects, but it's really only been people that I've been closer with. And I think because I am in the fractional space, you only have so much time to build those bonds. So maybe
Good point.
Santi, that would be more relevant for someone who's full
Right.
time.
But the idea is to spend 2 hours on something and then get some validation. But what
Yeah.
I've seen is product managers spending 2 weeks or 3 weeks building a basic product, not
Be-
building a prototype for validation.
oh
The other
yeah.
problem I have with prototyping, just as a general rule, by product managers is in many ways you're corrupting the design process. It's like, what's the joke? Don't think of an elephant. And of course, now you're
Oh,
immediately thinking of an elephant, right?
yeah.
So I show you my prototype and say, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And then we start polishing that, as
Yeah.
opposed to somebody stepping back and saying, wow, you suck at this. What you really want to do is this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also a relational thing. I think you have to have a good relationship
I
with.
agree. But,
Yeah.
I remember over the years, I've taught things like positioning or writing good, stories. And invariably, somebody will say, should I put together like a straw man, in particular with like positioning? And I'm like, well, it depends. Do you want them to polish your straw man? Because the way I teach positioning is to go, here's a crazy thought, go back to what problem you're solving and who you're solving it for, and talk about why your solution is unique in the market space. And if I start with my version of that, then I won't hear all of the brilliance from Santi and Megan because now we're polishing what I already wrote.
Yeah.
Mm.
I get that. No, I think that makes total sense. It's interesting. We're in an interesting time right now, and it's
Very
crazy
interesting.
because every team is doing it different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's hard to say like what's right and what's wrong. But Santi, to back to your initial point, it's like if you ask 5 teams, they're all going to say something different.
Yeah.
And like I even want to expand on that because it's like every product management has never really been this is how you do it to everyone because it's like everyone you talk to has either pivoted from another role or just done it inside their company. Like there's always just been these weird ways of becoming a product manager. So I feel like very few have the expertise that you're giving to them, Steve. Like very few actually get that core product management training to become a good product manager.
If I haven't said
And
it this call, only 20% of product managers have ever been trained in product management. So
yeah,
what do you expect? I mean, it would be really nice if there was like a PMP for product management. I mean,
there should be.
I think you can't really probably get a project management job. Well, you probably can, but you probably get, I don't know, preferential treatment at least if you're a project manager, if you've got the certification. Um, it, over the years, I have looked and rarely does any job posting say, some sort of certification preferred. Um,
Yeah,
and yet you probably wouldn't hire an accountant who didn't know how to do double entry bookkeeping, right?
that's true.
And that's why I wrote this book, Turn Ideas into Product. But most people simply haven't been trained. And so they're going where the noise is, either they're going to sales and supporting sales because that's where the noise is, or they're going to development and supporting development because that's where the noise is. And the other aspect that we haven't even talked about is how many times I'm now seeing product marketing managers filling the strategic gap because the product managers have become nerds. So the product
That's
managers are
true.
so busy working with development, and product marketing says, well, I can't do my work if I don't understand the market. And since the product manager doesn't understand the market, I guess I'm going to do that. So I'm finding at least half the people who are reading my book, Customer Conversations, are product marketing managers.
Wow.
Interesting stat. And folks, do read the book. It's a great book. I have it right here.
Oh my God, I got it too. Can
Yeah,
we all hold the book up at the
everyone
same
hold the book
time?
up.
Everyone, you
Yes.
got it.
Read this.
We
Read.
should
Yeah.
selfie.
You should. I
That's
still
so
owe a
funny.
selfie. I still owe a
I
selfie.
know, me too. That's so funny. No, I think that's so true. There's so many good insights from this episode. I feel like there's just so much going on, and there's so much change. And then on top of that, if a product marketer ends up filling that role, and then they hire a product manager who's training the product manager,
hmm
maybe that's the product marketing manager.
Yeah, I kind of have a question about this actually, real quick, Meg. That sparked a good one. So given all this change that's happening, everything's chaotic right now in at least some capacity. Steve, what would you say to someone that's wanting to, let's say it's a junior product manager or a product manager or just a product person trying to grow and advance in their career amidst this really rocky time right now? What would be the best piece of advice you would give them to do so with everything going on in the market and the world right now?
I really do think it is get to know customers, even if it requires civil disobedience. I was doing a training a while back, and there was the guy in the front row with his arms crossed the entire 2 days. And at the end, I did a kind of a rah rah. What are you going to do now that we've learned all this? What are you going to do next week? And this guy was like, nothing. I can't do anything. My boss won't let me. And I'm like, serious? I mean, you can't create a persona document. You can't start talking to developers about the problems you're trying to solve. I mean, nobody is stopping you from doing this. Um, and and so yeah, I'm so conscious of the number of companies that are turning the wrong things over to AI and questioning the value of whether we need product managers, or can't we just create the product builder by taking an engineer and making him responsible for just prioritizing. And I'm like, we have to find a thing that makes us unique in our companies. And I believe that thing is customer expertise. Sales knows the
Yeah.
buyers, maybe support knows the users. um, the developers know the technology. There are a lot of people who have expertise in a small way. I don't mean it small. It's in
In their
a
own way.
way.
Yes.
But who's the expert on the market? And I believe that most founders would say sales knows who they're selling to, but they don't necessarily know the market. But anyway, I'm ranting a bit, but the real point was figure out a way to become the expert on the market. And the way you do it is to make friends internally. Make friends with customer success. They talk to customers every day about other ways they could use the product. I mean, there are two forms of customer success. One is it's sales by another name, but it's supposed to be helping the client implement and embrace all the capabilities of the product that they need. Customer support hears from customers who are having problems. Make friends with them, right? Implementation services, if you have that, and a lot of B2B companies do, get to know what struggles they're encountering, right? And uh, and even sales. I mean, I've had many friends in sales who,
Agreed.
hey, can you set up a call with Joe Schmo? But then two other tricks. Another one is customer advisory boards.
Yep.
Seems like everybody would love it if somebody else would set one of those up. Great, let's set one up, right? And the key there is to populate the customer advisory board with the people you're trying to understand, right? And then the other one is kind of sneaky. Throughout my career, I've always had secret friends. I can call the CIO of some well-known companies and talk to them off the record. And I don't have to clear it with sales, and I don't have to clear it with legal, and I don't have to clear it with marketing, don't have to clear it with my boss, because I've worked with these people at prior companies, usually, and I can say, I know they're not gonna tweet about it. They're not gonna
Yeah.
about it. They're not gonna post it on, hey, I just got off the phone with Steve. He's got this great idea, right? Um, and I had a specific case. My CTO came up with a stupid implementation, and it was stupid on the face of it. I mean, I'm not as technical as my programmers were, but come on, we were all appalled at this idea, and he wouldn't listen to us. So I talked to the CTO of a well-known Fortune 50 company, and he told me, say this. But what he basically said is, if you implement it that way, I will discontinue using your product. And
Damn.
now guess what? I've got a customer saying this thing is stupid instead of me saying it. The customer
It's
voice is a
smart.
powerful thing.
It's smart.
It is the root. It is the root of all of this.
All right, Steve, we got one more question.
Okay.
All right. What's a piece of your best practices and your advice that you secretly ignore?
This was such a good question.
That is an evil question.
That's why we saved it for the end so you wouldn't hang up on us.
Pre.
uh, I'm going to go with prioritization. Um, I I teach a method for prioritization, which is largely designed for dealing with dysfunction. Everybody thinks their idea needs to be number one, and so I've got this very clever technique of saying, well, let's first look at how important it is to the market, which, oh, by the way, means you have to be an expert on the market to use this. And look at its impact on the organization. But in the majority of my career, I haven't needed that tool because the top priorities are obvious. And uh, so I guess it's not quite what you asked, but I mostly haven't had the level of dysfunction that I see in a lot of organizations. I did work for a very, very large company that was totally dysfunctional, and basically, it was easiest just to not do anything. There were so many people who could say no, nobody would say yes, and soon after I left. But other than that, it's like when I bring together smart people, the top priorities are obvious. And when you've got a seagull manager, right, somebody who swoops in, shits all over everything and leave. Anyway, when you do have like a seagull manager, sometimes it's like this is the CTO story. This is just stupid. And so in that case, I would say, well, we're going to do it in a way that satisfies the one person who cares. And then get back to what we believe our real priorities are. So I guess in the end of the day, I'm quite into, do what's right despite the people around you.
That's a good answer.
That was a good answer. You handled that very well, Steve.
Good job. Thanks for handling our spicy question.
Just enjoy talking with you both for sure.
We enjoy having the time with you. This is awesome. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
My career has been advocating for the strategic role of product management. I've written multiple books about the role and scope of product management, and I'm just hopeful that uh, even people who are using AI to supplement their skill set, I hope that they're communicating to their organizations the things that they do that AI cannot. And that is get trust with customers and see what they can't articulate and hear what they can't see.
Be human.
Totally.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll link both of your books as well in the show notes, and so that way people can read Customer Conversations. If I don't know why this thing doesn't want to zoom, but Customer Conversations, and yes, his other book, Mine is Buried. But yeah, so that way people can read your books and learn from the best. But yeah, we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
All right, invite me again. I'm sure I have other pithy, inappropriate things to say.
We will
We know you will.
we will definitely invite you again.